Good morning. A little over a year ago, my mom was invited by my half-sister Jane, who's here today, to a ladies' tea and luncheon at a church here in the Twin Cities. And Jane asked my mom a few weeks later how she had enjoyed herself at the luncheon. Classic mom's response: "Yeah, it makes me uncomfortable when there's that much polyester in one room." Not to mention in the basement of a church. Now, you might think that that comment stemmed from what most of us know to be my mom's great sense of style, but there actually was more to it than that. You see, when I was just about 3 years old, my mom was called in unexpectedly to her pastor's office and told that because she was a single mother raising me alone, she would not be allowed to attend the missionary Bible school at his church. According to Mom's best recollection, his words were, "Your life still shows the consequences of sin, and I have to protect my congregation from a woman like you." Mom told me that she walked out of his office that day with such a giant cloud of shame hanging over her that she spent the next several decades feeling less than welcome and less than worthy in nearly every religious setting in which she found herself. Well, fast forward to about 12 days ago, Mom had suffered a stroke brought on by her cancer, and as a result was finding it a little bit difficult to communicate. But as I and the rest of my family stood around her hospital bed, she looked up at us with her big green eyes and suggested out of the blue that we as a family come up with a family crest that stand for something meaningful. And this was out of nowhere. Never heard her mention this before. So I looked at my family and I turned back to Mom and I said, "Mom, what do you think the crest should stand for?" And she looked up, almost like a little 6-year-old at the ceiling, and her eyes got real big and a big smile came across her face. And she said, "I know. Inclusion. Inclusion." In the last few weeks, I've received countless emails, texts, and Facebook messages from people, a lot of you who are in this room, but people literally all over the world, describing to me in detail the impact that Jeannie Moran Androsoff had on their lives. I've heard everything from, "She caused me to rethink so much of what I was taught," to, "She loved me more than my parents even did." I'm curious, how many of you in this room feel at some point like my mom loved you in a way that impacted your life for the better? Well, as many of you know, Mom's journey was not an easy one, but I think we can all agree that it was a remarkably fruitful one. And so with that in mind, I wanted to spend just a few minutes this morning kind of walking you through her journey, letting you in through a window that you may not have been able to see through before, in order to let you know how she came to be who she was and all that she wanted to become. Jeannie Ann Moran was born on February 4th, 1950 in Indianapolis, Indiana. Her father, Bill, was a salesman and a World War II veteran, and her mother, Mary Lou, was a stay-at-home mom. Mom was the second of 6 children, and she told me that she recognized, even as a little girl, that she had a passion for God and a desire to follow Him. She was fascinated by the nuns who taught at the Catholic school that she attended, and in addition to staying after school regularly to help clean their chalkboards and just help them with duties around the classroom, she would often save up her entire allowance just to spend it on tiny little statues of saints that she would then give to the nuns as gifts. She actually considered becoming a nun, entering the convent, till she became a teenager and realized how much she enjoyed dating boys, and then that went out the window. When Mom was in 4th grade, her parents moved the family to Omaha, Nebraska, and she often described this time in her life as one of the absolute best. I conducted an informal interview with my grandma several years ago prior to her death, and she told me that my mom, right out of the gate, was the most lively in the family. Very social, very outgoing. I know that's really hard to believe. She was coming home every day from school with these grandiose, dramatic stories of encounters she had with friends and with teachers and with boys she had crushes on. Nothing was a secret, my grandma said. Everything was out in the open, sometimes a little too much. Mom had a favorite thing to do when she was young during her grade school years. She would often set up a mock office downstairs equipped with a telephone, a scratch pad, and pencils, and play office. You probably remember this. So it's no surprise for those of you that worked with Mom, she would one day become a really successful executive assistant. As is common with many adolescent girls, Mom noticed that as she moved into her teen years, her relationship with her father became to feel strained. It didn't help matters then when in the summer before her senior year of high school, her father's job took the family to Dayton, Ohio, and so Mom was forced to leave all of her friends and great memories behind in Omaha and move to a new city at the beginning of her senior year. In contrast to all the great memories she had in Omaha, Mom would go on to say that her senior year in Dayton was one of the darkest points in her life. She found herself struggling to make friends in Dayton and was referred to unaffectionately by many of her classmates as Nebraska Nellie, a name that she never forgot. That year, my mom became intimately acquainted with what it felt like to be an outcast, to feel rejected by nearly everyone around her. There was, however, one bright spot in that year that she can recall, and it was when a male classmate of hers, someone she didn't know that well, out of the blue told her that she was known as having the prettiest eyes in the senior class. And though she didn't know it at the time, she would later realize that in the midst of feeling rejected and alone, all it often takes is one person to make a difference. Even though my mom projected a very outgoing and happy demeanor, she told me that she graduated from high school that year without a real sense of who she was at all, or a real identity of her own. After graduation, she enrolled at Ohio State University as a Spanish major with the idea that she would become a teacher, but she admitted that that wasn't what she necessarily wanted to do. She was just doing it because all of her friends were heading off to college. She got a job as a bartender at a local dive, and from the stories I've heard over the past 30 plus years from my family and friends, she liked to party. Still, Mom told me years later that even though she had a lot of friends and had a lot of fun, she remembers going into campus restrooms during that time of her life just so she could look in the mirror, and this was her words exactly, to see if she even existed. It's not hard to see why so many years later, my mom began mothering those around her with the kind of love and unconditional acceptance that inspires a sense of inherent worth in the person that's receiving. At some point during my mom's work as a bartender, in her early 20s, the movie version of the rock opera Jesus Christ Superstar began showing at a theater just across the street. I'm guessing some of you remember when that movie came out. It was a bit of a scandal. One night after work, my mom went to catch a midnight showing, and it resonated with her in a really powerful way. She had been raised Catholic and had attended Mass for as long as she could remember, but as she sat in that dark theater that night and watched the actor portraying Jesus lay bare his soul in the Garden of Gethsemane, Mom later told me that something inside her heart broke open, and she felt as if she had just met the real Jesus for the first time in her life. She went on to see that movie in that same theater 27 times. And by the 8th or 9th time, she laughed that they started letting her in free. When several years later, Mom recounted this story in front of me to a pastor after church one Sunday, he told her that because of the unbiblical nature of that particular movie, there was no way she could have experienced Christ in that way. I remember her response verbatim. She looked at him and she said, "Well, I'm here, aren't I?" In 1974, while working as a waitress in what used to be the Radisson Hotel, just a few miles down the road from where we are now, my mom made the acquaintance of Nicholas Wences, a musician who was performing with his band out in the garden court of the hotel. As my mom told her, the first time they actually spoke was just after Nico, as they called him, had spotted my mom at a party with are you ready? A beer in one hand and a cigarette in the other. And she was dancing on a kitchen table. I love that image. they soon started dating and eventually got engaged, but 5 months into my mom's pregnancy, Nico told her that he couldn't be faithful as a husband, and so they parted ways. In March of 1976, I came along, and that day, Mom and I became the very definition of a team. I'm curious, was anybody in here raised by a single parent? Just a few of you, okay? Well, you guys know well, firsthand, the bond that is formed with between a parent and child when, at the end of the day, all you have is each other. My mom would sometimes look over at me in the living room when we were watching TV or in the car, and she would say, "It's just you and me against the world, kid." Throughout most of my grade school years, Mom was a very stern disciplinarian, as my family can most certainly attest to, but we also had a lot of fun. I would often notice that my friends' parents were a lot more regimented in strict in their family schedules, and in stark contrast to that, I loved how my mom was so spontaneous by nature. Now sometimes it could be frustrating. I'd be talking to her and all of a sudden she'd be squirrel, right? And she'd be gone, off to the next thing. But, being that it was just the two of us, we would be often in the middle of cleaning the house, and I would look over her and say, "Hey Mom, let's go to a movie and go get Mexican food." And before the vacuum cleaner was even put away, we were out the door. So, in those instances, it worked out to my advantage. Speaking of movies, Mom loved her movie popcorn. I would say obsessed. We once went to a movie, probably about 15 years ago, and when the concession stand person made the mistake of telling her they were out of popcorn, she literally lost it. I was over on the other side of the lobby, and she turned around screaming, "We can't stay! We can't stay! They're out of popcorn!" I walked away like this. As I reached my teenage years, Mom and I moved away from what I would consider to be a typical parent-son relationship and really moved to more of a friendship. Unlike most teenage boys, I absolutely loved hanging out with my mom, just the two of us. I loved her sense of humor. I loved the deep conversations we could so easily have. I loved how much she loved my friends and how much she enjoyed them. And I loved how much they loved her. I see a few of them here today. In fact, I would sometimes come home from an evening school activity and just find several of my friends hanging out in my living room with my mom. You remember that, don't you, Ash? Yes. But the thing about my mom that impacted me more than anything in the world, was her faith. I don't think there was ever a morning that I didn't wake up to find her in her living room chair with the Bible on her lap, nurturing the most intimate relationship with God that I have ever witnessed in my 38 years of living. My mom did not just talk about God. She didn't just believe in him. She knew him intimately. He was everything to her. And she didn't just say it, I watched it. My mom and I counted once and realized that we had moved 17 times before I was 14 years old. Due to our money struggles, and we had a lot of them, I think that, along with the challenge of raising a child alone, allowed my mom to realize in a really unique way how completely and utterly dependent she was on her God for every single aspect of her life. As I moved into my adulthood, I often expressed to Mom my doubts regarding faith, and because she just instinctively knew how my brain works, she was wise enough to know that my faith did not need to look exactly like hers. She would just listen. She would often empathize, just say, I know, or I don't know, but I hear you. She would share her relevant experiences, and most importantly, she would always encourage me to keep digging. She would encourage me to take God out of the idealistic box that I so often wanted to put him in by nature. She would encourage me to rest in his character and to just be okay with not having all the answers. When I told my mom that I was gay 15 years ago, she was, because of her religious heritage, understandably shaken, to say the least. But not for 1 second did she withhold her love from me. She spent the next 10 years or so getting to know some of my gay friends in Nashville, and would later say that it was there that she witnessed an authenticity in their hearts and in their lives that she had never known ever before. And many of them are sitting right here today. Because of them, she was moved to a place of understanding and what I would consider to be the definition of Christ-like compassion. She spent the next 8 years conducting her own research, diligently reading everything on both sides of the gay issue she could get her hands on, and most importantly, she prayed hard for godly wisdom. I think we all know where she landed. In Mom's own words, I prayed for 8 years for God to change my son, and instead, he changed me. When my mom was first diagnosed with cancer just a little over 2 years ago, the news hit her really, really hard. She felt as though her life was hanging in the balance, and she hadn't accomplished all that she wanted to. And so at that point, she knew it was time to take her passion for supporting gay folks and their families and move forward with it in a very public way. She launched her website, ifoundoutmom.com. Check it out, ifoundoutmom.com. And the rest is, as they say, history. For so long, my mom wondered why she had to wander through so many years of feeling rejected and shamed by the church for being a single mom. It hurt her so much. I saw her shed so many tears over it. And in many ways, she felt as though she had been destined to walk through life metaphorically on one leg. And as much as I do not understand for the life of me why she had to leave us so seemingly early in her life, I can look back in retrospect and I can see that the pain she experienced in life was never, ever in vain. For just as he promises, God took my mom's experiences of shame and rejection and used them to birth in her a deep, unconditional love and compassion for people that very few people have. She healed hearts with her love. She literally changed people's lives. I know you will miss her so much. But the legacy she leaves behind is an incredibly powerful one. For Mom, the plaque that still hangs in her kitchen really says it all. Give thanks in everything. Love has no end. Be a blessing to others and believe in your story. I love you. And when